Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. We'll continue now where we left off yesterday in the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson, reading near halfway down the page on page 432. Remember, yesterday we were talking about this book that was produced in defense of union of church and state and the sovereignty of the Pope, the divine right of the Pope to rule, and the responsibilities of the governments of the world to acquiesce to his supreme, divine, infallible authority, and to do whatever the Pope tells him to do. Now, it concludes with this statement. It says, the holy alliance of church and state, that is, the holy union of church and state, constitutes the union of soul and body, the life and vigor of Christian society. Puts pretty much all the importance on the union of church and state, that the Roman Catholic Church should control the state, that the state should serve the Roman Catholic Church. It likens it to the same importance as the union of the soul and the body, implying that if the soul departs from the body is dead. Well, if you separate the church from the state is likewise dead. Okay, so it's a matter of life and death, that church and state shall be united, just as the souls must be united with the body for it to have life. And this union constitutes the very life and vigor of Christian society. Now, that's putting about as much importance on the union of church and state as can possibly be put upon it. And the Constitution of the United States separates church and state, and this country is anything but dead. It was the leader of the Protestant world, is regarded as the greatest nation ever upon the earth. But the Pope says, no, it's dead, and church and state must be reunited. It says, continuing with the statements made in this book, it is time that a general council shall teach statesmen, that is, governors, presidents, congressmen, senators, that to teach statesmen this salutary lesson, and that they may not put their foot upon the steps of Peter's throne. Statesmen are not to encroach upon the divine right of the papacy. It says that it is their duty to cooperate with the church, pretty plainly spoken, and that in all matters appertaining to the order of grace, that is, religious matters, their position is to sit down and listen respectfully before the church's teaching chair. In other words, all the governments of the world are to just shut up, sit down, and listen to the papacy. Take notes, because you'll be tested and tried. That's the essence of this book that was widely circulated in the United States and to be used as a textbook to educate Roman Catholic children in this country. What effect do you suppose this book had upon little Roman Catholic minds? It set them on a course to work diligently as a matter of religious dogma, little by little to overthrow this heretical government and to impose a papal monarchy. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the country today. Now, he says, nothing short of the importance of the matters involved in the doctrine of papal infallibility and the consequences which are expected to follow it can justify such lengthy extracts from a single book. But these considerations do, for the reason that that as books like this are seen by few and read by still fewer, a better opportunity for understanding the objects to be accomplished by them is furnished by this method to both Protestants and Roman Catholics. Multitudes of the latter, that is, Roman Catholics, are deceived and misled into the belief that the doctrine of the Pope's infallibility is necessary to the Church, the Roman Catholic Church, whose Christian teachings they revere. Whereas, if they, by intelligent instruction and thoughtful reflection, were assured, as the fact really is, that it pertains alone to the power and authority of the popes, that is, to the papacy and not to the Church, it is believed they would neither assent to it themselves nor allow it to be taught as a necessary dogma of faith to their children, either in schools or under the auspices of the Church or elsewhere. That's right. If Roman Catholics in this country were apprised of the full strategy of the papacy with regard to the promulgation of a religious dogma that the Pope is infallible, if every Roman Catholic knew the true intent of papal infallibility, that it did nothing but to strengthen the authority of the Pope so that he could become the dictator of the world, Roman Catholics would denounce papal infallibility. You see, the Church doesn't speak frankly to its members. How convenient, right? Because if they spoke frankly, Roman Catholics, by and large, would reject papal infallibility for the pretense that it is, the religio-political pretense that it is. And they would also see that the union of church and state is an attempt to increase the power of papal infallibility. And they would agree with us Protestants, us true Protestants, that state and church should be forever separated. Now, it would be unfair to them to doubt that they would reject it if assured, as these extracts would assure them, that papal infallibility requires the destruction of every form of popular government, such as here in the United States and all the other Roman Catholic nations in the world that liberated themselves from papal temporal power, in order that a grand papal confederation, listen carefully, in order that a grand papal confederation may be constructed for the government of the world under the sole dominion of the Pope. There's your New World Order. R.W. Thompson has again, in different terms, insisted that the papacy's ultimate goal is to be the head of a global government. And that Roman Catholics, if they knew what the papacy was really up to, would reject papal infallibility, would reject this New World Order, and condemn the papacy and the Jesuits for upsetting the peace of the world and fomenting wars and manipulating people to achieve this. The same Jesuit-led upheavals of Europe that were rejected by the Roman Catholics of every Roman Catholic country in Europe, which ultimately led to the suppression and abolishment of the Jesuit order, would be repeated in our day if Roman Catholics were ever told the truth about the real designs and motives behind papal infallibility. He says they would, upon proper investigation, see and know that the council which passed the decree of papal infallibility was not a representative body with authority to bind their consciences, but that it was, on the other hand, composed of those who were indebted alone to the Pope for their authority which they possessed, and that he could strip them of their robes at his own pleasure in case of disobedience to his commands. In other words, he had a packed house because he had their lives in his hands. He could defrock them in a moment if they voted against papal infallibility. He could excommunicate them from the church if they voted against papal infallibility. thus condemning themselves to persecution in this life and hell in the next. In other words, the vote in favor of papal infallibility at the First Vatican Council of 1870 was coerced. It was made under duress. It says, and they would learn also that instead of the decree having been passed unanimously by the whole council, as they have been instructed, there were 157 absentees who withdrew because of it, leaving those only to vote who were in favor of it. That, in point of fact, it was a conflict between the church, as it had existed under more than 250 popes before Pope Pius IX, and the papacy, and that, and that the victory was won by the latter to the discomfiture and regret of vast multitudes of their devout Christian brethren in all parts of the world. Under close examination, we realized that the Roman Catholic Church wasn't ready to assent to papal infallibility. There was much protest. Many people just simply wouldn't go to the council. Others protested before that papal infallibility would be the destruction of the church. I mean, we even have the quote from Lord, fiddlesticks. His name just escaped me. Anyway, the quote that is often repeated and never attributed to the papacy was directed directly to the papacy. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've all heard that quote, but few ever tell us that it was directed at the papacy during this time when it was being contemplated to make a papal decree that the popes are infallible. Much opposition. And it says the council total consists of 692 members. There were but 535 present when this decree was passed, showing, as stated, 157 were absent. They just simply wouldn't go. Now, of these 157, 63 of the diocesan bishops and representatives of what are called, quote, the most illustrious sees in Christendom, unquote, signed a written protest against papal infallibility. Now remember, the popes got their lives in his hands. They got together and signed a document protesting. Isn't that wonderful? Protesting the decree of papal infallibility. And it says of those present, 533 voted for the decree and 2 against it, one of whom was from the United States. But these were so carried away by the excitement that they gave in their adhesion. Many of the absentees had left Rome in disgust, having signified their opposition before leaving. They were opposed, and they left in disgust. They would have nothing to do with this decree. It says on the day of the vote there were 66 in Rome who refused to attend the session. 66 remained in Rome, but they would not go to the council. He says among these were 4 cardinals, 2 patriarchs, 2 primates, 18 archbishops, and the remainder were bishops. The result, consequently, was a mere triumph of the majority over the minority, as occurs in legislative bodies. The pretense of unanimity is without foundation. The pretense that the Holy Spirit directed that council is a pretense, is a falsehood, except as regards the votes actually cast. Now, to compare results thus obtained to the direct intervention of providence, capital P, in other words, the direct intervention of God himself, in imitation, as it was said earlier, in imitation of the delivery of the law to Moses, indicates the possession of an exceedingly high faculty of invention. It borders closely upon Now pay particular attention to the word that R.W. Thompson uses to describe this papal infallibility, this decree of papal infallibility. He called it delusion. You know what the Bible calls it? You know what the Bible calls it? Strong delusion. This idea that there is a man on this earth that is infallible, that is the very voice of God on earth, that is Christ hidden under a veil of flesh, that every man, woman, and child and government of the world must sit at his feet and take his instruction as though it were issued from the throne of Almighty God. That's not just delusion. That is strong delusion. It's a lie. And most of the Christian world believes it in one degree or another. And if they don't agree, they grudgingly acquiesce. Hardly any protest anymore. Now, therefore, it may well and appropriately be said that the description of the scene by the author, from whose book the foregoing quotations are extracted, has, in calling Pope Pius IX, quote, greater than Moses, the very vicar of Jesus Christ himself, unquote, so far transcended the bounds of reason as to make their author appear like one who lives only in the ethereal atmosphere. There's no authority for saying that he is a Jesuit, but if he were found in companionship with one known to be so, it would be puzzling to tell which was the twin Dromio, because, beyond all doubt, they would be two Dromios, one in semblance. Here's the question. What was expected to be accomplished by the decree of the Pope's infallibility, by solemnly declaring that God had but one representative upon the earth, and that he was so endowed with divine wisdom that he alone could prescribe the universal rule of faith, and was endowed with sufficient authority to enable him to exact and to enforce obedience to his commands? Let the thoughtful mind, if there are any thoughtful minds left in the United States of America, desirous to obtain a satisfactory answer to this question, ponder well upon the teachings of universal history, the birth, the growth, and the decay of former nations. Upon innumerable pages he will find it written, more indelibly than if it had been carved upon metal by the engraver's tool, that from the very beginning of the Christian Church at Rome, and I will correct R.W. Thompson and call it the Roman Catholic Church at Rome, whensoever that was, papal infallibility had never been recognized or established as a dogma of the Roman Catholic faith. If the Apostle Peter, as the papacy claims, was the first of the popes, then up till the pontificate of Pope Pius IX, there were 258 popes, to say nothing of the numerous anti-popes. They were, besides, numerous general and provincial councils, beginning with that of Nice under Constantine in 325 A.D. and ending with that of the Vatican Council in 1870, the period between the two being 1,555 years. And yet, during all this long, protracted period, there is not to be found among the articles of religious faith announced from time to time by the Church one single sentence, one single word, or even one single syllable which requires it to be believed that the Pope is infallible. Is all this history mythical? Has it led the quote-unquote faithful into error and sin? Were only those popes obedient to the divine law who believed themselves infallible and acted accordingly, while those who did not were heretics? Why were general councils necessary to obtain the universal consent of the Church if the popes were infallible and could decree the faith on their own accord? When popes disagreed, as did Pope John the 22nd, Nicholas III, and Innocent III and Celestine and Pelagius and Gregory the Great upon important questions, how were they to be decided? Were the popes who denied their own infallibility destined to be cut off in eternity from the presence of God for their heresy? Edgar enumerates 8 of these who directly disaffirmed their belief in papal infallibility, and there were many others who did not affirm it. Were all of these popes heretics? And were also the great church historians as Launay, Almain, Marca, Dupin, and Bossuet, and others, and the whole body of the French and Cisalpine Christians, all heretics? And what is to be said of the General Council of Pisa, of Constance, and Basel, all 3 of which denied the Pope's infallibility in terms so strong of condemnation? It would be easy to multiply these questions, but it is sufficient to say that if popes who denied infallibility were heretics, then the line of apostolic succession is broken by the removal of several important links in the chain, and the attempt to trace back the present Roman Church to the apostolic times and to the Apostle Peter is an entire and humiliating failure. And it is an unavoidable inference from a long line of facts well proven in history that but for the unfortunate alliance between the ambitious popes and the Jesuits to build up and strengthen their power at the expense of the Roman Catholic Church, the Christian world of the present day would have taken no interest in the prosecution of that inquiry. The Church is of less consequence to the Jesuits than to their own society. And as they have invariably condemned the Roman Catholic Church when not upon their side, so there has been no time since the death of Ignatius Loyola when they did not consider its humiliation, the humiliation of the Roman Catholic Church, by them, the Jesuit order, as promotive of, quote, the greater glory of God, unquote, when thereby their own power and authority could be enlarged. Every example in history where there was a contention between the Jesuits and the papacy, the Jesuits took the opportunity to humiliate the popes, to humiliate the church, and to just run roughshod over their authority, pretended or otherwise. It's the power of the Jesuits that means most to the Jesuits. They are the rowers of the papal bark, and if the Pope wants to get out of the boat, they'll just kill him and put another one in. History has repeated itself too many times to leave doubt about who controls the papacy and what the goal of the Jesuits is. World domination, under the volition of a single man, a pope of their choosing, but not before completely and utterly destroying Protestantism. We'll be back right after these messages.
$100 days, 100 subscribers at $7 will bring FirstAmendmentRadio.com to the minimum level necessary to sustain it through 2015. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com. $7 a month. Really, you can afford that for our Protestant First Amendment rights and the gospel of the kingdom message. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, welcome back to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you appreciate Inquisition Update, you value the information you receive here, please support Inquisition Update by supporting First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you wish to make comment or suggestions, criticisms, or encouragement, please email me, tom@seawaves.us. That's tom at SEAWAVES.us. Now, we're going to return our discussion toward Pius IX and his so-called infallible decree of a brand spanking new dogma in the Roman Catholic Church. It's called the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. It was in 1854 that this Pope Pius IX, whose temporal power had been stripped from him by the Roman Catholic nations of Europe, they simply would not allow him to be king over them anymore, and they established their own republics, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. The whole, what used to be called the Holy Roman Empire was crumbling around Pope Pius's knees. And he was being cast out. And their Jesuits were being cast out as well. But just 16 years hence, there would be the Vatican Council, 1870, when the Pope would be declared officially in this kangaroo court, this kangaroo council, he would be declared divine and infallible. And to test the waters before that council, presuming himself to be infallible, decreed from his papal chair, the so-called chair of Peter, the very throne of God on earth, this brand spanking new Roman Catholic dogma, the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. Now, I'm not going to belabor the point with a lengthy definition, but this is what Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary means. That it was Mary who was conceived without sin. It was Mary, not Jesus. Mary was conceived without sin. Exempt from the fall of man. Exempt from original sin. It was she who was born immaculately. And that Christ derived his divinity from Mary, his mother, which elevates Mary to the God of gods. If you don't recognize what this is, I mean, this is ancient Babylonianism wrapped in Christian cloaks. This is ancient Babylon worship. The Queen Semiramis was the Queen of Heaven, right? Well, they're just simply doing the same thing to Mary. Now, this became a dogma in the church, which means that you must assent to this. You must believe this. You may not reserve any emotion in your heart contrary to this papal declaration of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. Or you are ipso facto excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church and denied salvation, and hell will be your flaming home for eternity. And he promoted this through this presumption of papal infallibility at the very time when he had lost all of his temporal power, and Rome and all of Europe was seemingly in complete rebellion against him. Not only the Protestants who protested the papacy as Antichrist, but even Roman Catholic nations simply would not allow him to be a king over them. So he tested the waters. I am infallible. And here is a new dogma. You must believe that Mary was immaculately conceived. She's Queen of Heaven. She is Queen of all. The Queen of all nations. The Mother of God. The Mother of God. The papacy is going to test his power with this. It says, when Pope Pius IX in 1854 signalized the close of his eighth year of his pontificate by issuing his decree to the effect that thenceforward the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary should be accepted as a dogma of faith, he acted of his own accord and without convening a general council. See, that's what infallible popes do. They don't call a council. They don't need a council. They just simply utter with the voice of God. I mean, after all, if he is Jesus Christ hidden under a veil of flesh, what does he need a council for? If he's the creator of all heaven and earth, and the earth is his and the fullness thereof, what does he need the consent of a council for? He can just simply create a new dogma for his faith. That Mary was immaculately conceived. That she is God of gods and Jesus is just her son. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful that we can link papal infallibility to this blasphemy. Because they're both blasphemies. Blasphemy begets blasphemy. A decree of papal infallibility is blasphemy. The decree that Jesus got his divinity and sinlessness from his mother, Mary, is just as blasphemous. Blasphemy is breeding blasphemy here with Pope Pius IX, even when seemingly the whole world had rebelled against him, even his own subjects. It's amazing that at this time when the very foundations of the papacy were shaking, that the papacy had the audacity to proclaim itself infallible and to proclaim in proof of that infallibility a new dogma in the Roman Catholic Church that had never been heard of before. Unbelievable audacity. So when Pope Pius IX in 1854 signalized the close of his 8th year as Pope by issuing his decree to the effect that henceforward the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary be accepted as a dogma of faith, he acted of his own accord and without convening a general council. It is fair to say, therefore, that he considered this an act of infallibility, then, for the first time, put in practice and executed. Okay? I am infallible, and I'm going to prove it. I'm going to announce to the whole world, without convening a council, I'm going to do this all by myself as though I were God on the earth, a new dogma. He acted on this pretense. It wasn't just bluster. He acted on it. He simply, as much as said, there, now you have a new dogma in the church. I have proclaimed it myself without any assistance from heaven or earth. What do you think of me now, all you rebellious subjects of mine? R.W. Thompson says it was doubtless an experiment practiced with the view to ascertain whether or not it would obtain the approbation of those whose consciences were to be influenced by it. It was a trial balloon. It was a trial balloon to test papal infallibility, which had not, by the way, been yet formally decreed at the First Vatican Council. That wasn't to come for another 16 years. It says the experiment was successful, and inasmuch as it involved only a question purely of a religious character, no special or injurious consequences followed. Protestants did not regard themselves warranted to complain about it for the plain reason that the religious faith of the Roman Catholics concerned them. They were not concerned about what the Roman Catholic Church believes. I mean, after all, they grew up in the United States where religious liberty is practiced. It's a matter of our Constitution. And so they took a hands-off approach when they should have been shaking the walls. They allowed this to take place. Protestants threw up no opposition, respecting this blasphemy. They didn't dare say that the Roman Catholic Church has just proven itself to be the Church of Antichrist. That would be too controversial, wouldn't it? That would be too Protestant. We need to respect the rights of these Roman Catholics. The rights of these Roman Catholics to make Protestantism destroyed and to take over the world much less the government of the United States, on the simple dogma of papal infallibility. It says Protestants did not regard themselves warranted to complain of it for the plain reason that the religious faith of Roman Catholics concerned themselves alone. This was just a matter for Roman Catholics. Protestants should have had nothing to say about it. Well, that might be tolerable as long as Roman Catholics never have any position whatsoever in the government. But since they do have a controlling role in our government, the decree of papal infallibility has all the weight of consequence and history behind it, and the destruction of this Protestant constitutional republic. Where were the Protestants? It says Pope Pius IX, however, intended by this decree something more than merely to add a new dogma to the faith. Undoubtedly, his object was to employ this exercise of infallible power so that if accepted with unanimity by the membership of the Church, that might be considered such an endorsement of the doctrine as would justify him in convening a general council and having it decreed that not himself alone, but that all other popes, both good and bad, were infallible. So the doctrine of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary was a trial balloon. The papacy waited for the reaction of the Roman Catholic faithful to that dogma, and once it was accepted as a dogma of the Church without any protest from the Protestants, then they simply had the green light to convene this council and proclaim the Pope to be infallible. That's how we got papal infallibility. What a sham! What a sham. No, what a delusion. What a great delusion. It's spoken of specifically in the Bible. It's called a strong delusion in the Bible. A lie that the popes are divine and infallible. Now, R.W. Thompson says, this is not said reproachfully, but rather to indicate the shrewdness and sagacity practiced by Pope Pius IX to influence the large body of believers in the Roman Catholic Church. The whole history of the papacy at that time proved that it was essential to its future success that the doctrine of papal infallibility should be extended beyond mere questions of religious belief so as to embrace other matters connected with the revolutionary movements then in progress in Europe. What were those revolutionary movements then in progress in Europe? The Protestant Reformation and the Roman Catholic nations even following the example of the Protestants, throwing off the temporal power of the Pope, the Antichrist. These revolutionary movements then in progress in Europe, which were threatening to undermine, if not to destroy, the papal power, that is, the temporal power of the Pope. I want to correct R.W. Thompson once again. The Catholic nations rejected the temporal or kingly power of the Pope, but the Protestant nations rejected both his temporal power and his spiritual power and denounced him as Antichrist. Had the rest of Europe, the Roman Catholic nations, also rebelled against this human invention called the spiritual power of the Pope, had they followed the example of the Protestants, we wouldn't be in this situation today. This new world order would never have become a threat. The temporal power of the Pope is only needed to coerce obedience to his spiritual power. The Protestants destroyed both. He says revolutionary disturbances are always threatening to those against whom they are directed, and Pope Pius IX, believing as he undoubtedly did that such as then existed in Europe were directed or would be, if not checked, against his temporal power, deemed it necessary to obtain, if possible, the sanction of a conciliar decree to the exercise by him of new powers in addition to those then universally conceded to him over religious questions and affairs. Thus, he designed to obtain the express or implied assent of the Roman Catholic Church to his exercise of jurisdiction over political religious matters, that is, church and state matters, in order that he might be enabled to promulgate such decrees as would, through the agency and influence of, quote-unquote, the faithful, that is, individual Roman Catholics, among the different European nations, arrest the progress of the revolutionary movements and save his temporal power. So they're being elicited, the church, the faithful, are being solicited to help the overthrow of Protestantism. He says, hence, when the decree of infallibility was interpreted by him in the light of these events and his own purposes, he had no difficulty in concluding that it had given him jurisdiction over all such political, religious, that is, church and state questions, as bore either directly or indirectly upon the spiritual or temporal interests of the church in all parts of the world. That his successor, Pope Leo XIII, agreed with him in this interpretation, no intelligent man can deny. If he were not influenced to do this by his desire to regain the temporal power which was taken away from his predecessor, Pope Pius IX, Pope Leo XIII's education, his Jesuit education and training, would impress his mind with the conviction that a temporal crown upon his head is a positive necessity in order that he may promote, quote, the greater glory of God, unquote. Consequently, when it is thus made too plain and palpable to admit of fair denial that the infallibility of the Pope is the chiefest and most fundamental dogma of the Roman Catholic faith, the very foundation of the whole system of papal belief, it is positively obligatory upon us in this country to understand its full import and meaning. R.W. Thompson has told us once again, as Americans, it is our life and death duty to understand the importance and the matter of life and death to this country, that we understand where the papacy has taken the world with this decree of papal infallibility. You know, it's just too easy for Protestants and those who are not familiar with Scripture or history to just laugh off this presumption of papal infallibility. No, it's very, very real to the papacy and to the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. And they demand of the governments of the world that they be acquiesced to, that the Pope has a divine right to rule the world. And you, as governors, kings, princes, must sit down, shut up, and listen to the papacy and do what he says. He says if anything were required to make this obligation more binding than it is found in the facts now confronting us that our public schools are pronounced godless because this religious dogma, papal infallibility, is not taught to our children, and that it is taught to Roman Catholic children in parochial schools, mainly under Jesuit control. You see, they're insistent that papal infallibility be taught in all the schools by Jesuits, that our common school system should be Jesuit education. They should all be brought up in the same educational environment as was Pope Leo XIII. From cradle to grave be taught monarchism, papal infallibility, the Pope's divine right to rule, that the nations should just lay down their arms and just do whatever the papacy tells them to do. They should acquiesce to a global ruler. You know, whatever happened to the well worn out phrase, all good government is local? All good government is local? You know, that's rooted in Protestant theology, Protestant theology. It's the model of the early Christian churches. You see, they were united in faith, but they were independent as churches. They governed themselves independently. All good government is local, like the Church of Jesus Christ at Jerusalem, the Church of Jesus Christ at Antioch, the Church of Jesus Christ in Thessalonica, they were all independent churches, bound by the same law, bound by the same Christ, but independent. That's not the model that the papacy wants to follow. No, the whole world is to be the very image of the Roman Catholic Church. All must face east toward Rome to worship, and all must receive from the hand of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in Rome. And in order to achieve it, they have to get control of the education systems around the world to teach this globalism. And that's observable facts on the ground. That's why they're teaching globalism in the schools, to prepare them to be complacent, unthinking, acquiescent, submissive subjects of the coming global monarch. And I say coming only because most people don't recognize this is even happening, when in fact it's already in place. It's already in place. It's up and running. They just haven't hung the open sign on the door. New World Order, open for business. Today you have a new God on this earth, the Pope of Rome, and you will do, think, and say whatever he says. It's already up and running. We've got examples in this country of churches that have rejected this New World Order and who have been persecuted into non-existence, trampling over the rights of American citizens because they choose not to acquiesce to this New World Order about which there is nothing new at all. Everybody should recognize it for what it is. It's simply the old world order reestablished on a global basis. Papal monarchism. Are we going to just sit down, shut up, and do whatever the Pope says? Or do we have a king and a kingdom? Are we going to serve two masters or one? I'll see you tomorrow on Inquisition Update.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.